Let's start with, so if you have a live question, that's the mic. The floor is open. So the first question from Eric in Portland. How does Polymer stack up with other web component implementations in terms of performance? Perf matters.
So I can take that. My name is Alex Komorowski. I didn't present tonight. I'm a product manager working on Polymer and Blink. So one of the important things to think about with Polymer is this is a framework for the future. This is a library for the future. And so as browsers ship these web component standards natively, it will just automatically speed up. So Chrome has many of the pieces shipping, and we hope that HTML imports will make it into M36. And so our goal in browsers that don't yet support the web components emerging standards is to have performance that's comparable to what you would get in frameworks today, but that once browsers ship these native implementations, it just gets much, much faster.
Yeah, so performance is a really complicated topic. So it's actually a little bit difficult, and web components is a very broad term. So the question's a little bit difficult to answer. But Polymer actually isn't an implementation of web components. So web components is a native feature that Polymer is using. And that native feature, because it's in the browser, should long-term be a better bet.
So I'll reiterate that with Xtag, that's maybe an implementation of a library to make web components even easier to use. One awesome thing about that is that we all use the same polyfills. So the 80% of that code is the same. So the performance characteristics you'll see in Xtag or Polymer are going to be very, very alike. And I think that's something that when they get down to native, and most of the library is native, and it's just that layer that they talked about, you're not going to see much difference.
Okay, great. So again, if you have a question in the audience, just line up at the mic and ask it. I'll take another moderator question. So Jonathan Garby, a heavy web platform docs contributor, is asking one of the highest voted questions. Can Polymer and the work in progress standards is based on perform with a small enough difference in rendering compared to server-generated pages? Again, performance.
Let me take a stab at this one as well. So the way I think of it is that the web platform is a series of tools. It's a series of APIs and capabilities that you can use. What Web Components does is it adds a number of tools on the end. But what I've found personally, and other people as they explore using Web Components and imagining this future, is that a lot of the best practices we have found have turned out to be local maxima. So server-side rendering is an example where it's just received wisdom at this point that you're going to need to do server-side rendering to get really fast initial load performance. Actually, a number of folks internally who have explored web components and the future of web components very in depth have found that actually it might be the answer that what you should do is cache your component definitions very heavily client side and pass down something that has just semantic looking markup and it inflates locally. So I think what's exciting about all this stuff is the addition of a few more tools on the end sometimes upsets a lot of these best practices we found and allows us to find a much better place somewhere else.
I'll say too, with the ability with HTML imports is we can actually change the way we deliver applications. So you can think about an app that has the bare bones minimum. You deliver that to the user in a second or something. That is this thing they need to see right away. And then using imports, you can effectively offload a lot of the rest of the app and load things on demand. So it does change the way we sort of structure apps. The second part to this is there's nothing stopping you from just having a server that outputs a bunch of custom HTML markup. If you had a server that output a megabyte of HTML, you're going to have a problem. That's going to be slow. There's nothing changes in the world of custom elements. The difference is that what happens is things get activated on the client side. It's ultimately a client side technology.
Again, questions? Just hit the mic. Does Polymer HTML imports implementation load imported HTML files asynchronously like AMD.js? Who's got this one?
All right. So AMD modules and HTML imports, which is really what the question is about, are different things. One is about JavaScript, and I don't actually know too much about it. And then there's HTML imports, which is actually HTML. That said, the underlying technology of HTML imports has an async attribute. If you go that route, things become very difficult very quickly, but it's totally an option.
One bit of information I do have with this, in speaking with Dave Herman at Mozilla, which I did frequently, is that we're actually talking about having a module tag potentially inside of HTML imports that will allow you, it already has its own DAG, so it does do some dependency resolution, but the module tag will allow you to do things that are very, very AMD-esque, because as you know, modules coming in ES6 are essentially a form of AMD, provide a lot of the same features, so that's coming in HTML imports.
So the next question was similar. Does it play well with AMD modules? I think it's kind of covered, but
I just want to say too, like AMD and JavaScript modules is a technology that loads JavaScript. With imports, you can load CSS, HTML, everything. It's a different way to deliver Unity dependencies in the world of web components. So it's fundamentally a different thing to think about. But as Daniel said, there's explorations of like how to combine these two technologies. I think when we have more capabilities in JavaScript, like modules and classes and all this cool stuff that we're totally promised in ES6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, 11, we'll eventually be able to combine a lot of stuff. And everything is actually at the lowest level has been thought about. I promise you. People are actually exploring different ways to what does implementing ES6 classes look like in the world of custom elements. That is something that's started from day one and it's been going on. The conversations are there.
cool. All right, let's take an audience question.
Hi, yeah, my name is Philip. I have a question. So, microphone beeping. Okay. Okay, I think we need to pull this here. Is that better? That's right. I think I have to talk really quietly.
Yeah, we'll repeat the question.
How does a library like Polymer, how does it interact with existing model view controller frameworks? If I'm already using Backbone or Angular, how can I use web components? Because it seems to do a lot of things that those frameworks do now. I actually got a bit I felt a bit weird when you use that tag to pull in data from a server, because usually you would do that through a model, and you how do you see that working in the future?
Okay. Can you maybe repeat the question? How does it work with other client libraries, Backbone, so on?
Matt, you covered this, right?
I'm happy to talk. Do you want to?
Okay, I'm getting all the hard ones. So like I said, right, Polymer integrates with existing technologies relatively well if they're just using the elements, right? And where else should I go with that?
Well, it sounds great.
Started well.
Yeah, so one thing to point out is that Polymer elements and these MVC frameworks, they're not mutually exclusive by any means, right? They do work together. And there's lots of different ways that you can build your application, right? So we're not trying to say, hey, always use core Ajax. It's just a thing that we created. We think it's really awesome. We think it's a nice way to work with Ajax, but it's up to you guys, how you want to actually build your application. So if you want to leverage it, by all means, please do. But there's lots of ways to skin that cat, I think.
All right, let's take another audience question.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. So the first one, there's a bunch of imports up there, and I think everyone's kind of thinking the same thing. It's a bunch of HTTP requests. What is the current state of bundling these all together so you can get it down to one HTTP request while preserving encapsulation and all of that stuff? The second question is, there was a great demo, an Xtag demo of a auto-sizing text area element. Can that currently be submitted with a form, like the value attribute of that element? Does the native form browser element know to extract that? You can extend a native element, but does it go the other way where you can, because it's being extended from a text area, does the form element know to get the value when submitting the form?
Do the second one. Okay.
So yeah, in Xtag we support, there's actually two definitions. I don't know if we went over this in any of the talks. When you use an element that inherits from a native element, there's the is equals syntax, the is attribute. So if you had a text area, you could say text area is your tag and then is equals super text area. In that case, you would be able to use the same prototype, and it inherently value from an input or something like that would actually post with the form it's in. So that's all baked in. And some people even like to use their own text area input inside of an actual custom element name. So either way, you get that.
So back to the first question, how to optimize for limited number of requests. So a few things. One, this is one of those classic cases where Polymer is not taking away any of your current toys. So it just works like everything else does. You can actually pass it through those parsers. That said, we also have a tool called Vulcanizer, which we're writing, which is out there today and has documentation to specifically that knows how to deal with Polymer elements and can combine them into a single CSS file, single JS file, and single HTML file, and can optionally pull out the JS into an external file for CSP environments. So we're working on the tooling, but it shouldn't really break the current tools anyway.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, like, this is a really important point. Like, the web development best practices don't change in the world of web components. So what you didn't see tonight was the ability to, instead of having your script tag inline and your element, you can totally reference an external script. Instead of having your style sheets inline and a style tag in your element, you can totally reference a style sheet. So this is great because you can use things like minifiers, grunt tasks, right? You can write your elements in CoffeeScript for all we care, right? It's about you and your productivity. And it's just, it doesn't really change the way we develop. It kind of just changes the way you think about building apps.
All right, so I'm going to take a quick lightning question here. Are there plans to support IE8, 9, 10 Android browser? Quick answer.
Yep. So IE10 is supported. So Polymer, we actually didn't do this particularly well in the presentations, but the last two versions of every major browser are supported. So IE8 and IE9 are not included in that. And then the other exception is the Android browser, which is also not included in that. So that's a relatively straightforward one.
So one note on that is IE actually had a hook that would, when I was doing the polyfill, we had split polyfills, then they agreed to just merge and use the same one. You would be able to do it if they hadn't got rid of HTC files and CSS behaviors in IE8. Oddly enough, it's like this skip ground where it's up to 7, they skip it in 8, and then 9 has all these affordances that are standard web. So it's kind of not possible.
All right, so audience question.
So going back to performance, I just see that people put together a bunch of components on the page because it's nice and easy, and maybe you have 20 of them, and they all include 20 different copies of jQuery, and they're all maybe different versions of jQuery all on that same page. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so HTML imports have a deduping feature. It's currently based off of the absolute URL. So if you have different versions or they come from different CDNs, that's going to be a problem. There's already a bunch of work in the spec to try and address that as well and do it relatively quickly. That said, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that today on the web. So there are certain, making something very, very easy allows you to also make mistakes very, very easily, and I'll totally admit to that. But for the most part, we're not making this any, it's not an additional problem. That said, the ability of HTML imports to dedupe is pretty awesome. If we can get it to do it in other aspects, that'll be great too. And if you're including 5 versions of jQuery on your page, you're probably in trouble anyway.
Cool. Take a quick question here. Will AngularJS and Polymer merge in the future?
Okay, I'll take that one. So I think Angular is a great example of one of the frameworks of today that's done an amazing job of building a very, very effective framework. One thing that's important to remember, and I think Matt hit on this in his talk, is that with web components, the world is a very different place. So things that were created before the web components revolution may have to rethink some of the things in this new world. So Polymer is a great example where it's been born in this new world, assuming web components and being able to design for that. I think it's really exciting to watch the Angular team talk about using things like Shadow DOM and other aspects of web components. I imagine that over time, a number of different frameworks will start sort of embracing this web components revolution. So, and Ember as well, as Daniel points out.
Okay. We'll take an audience question.
Hi, thanks for doing this. What kind of testing strategy would you recommend?
So we have actually the engineer who's built our testing infrastructure here.
We know people.
Daniel, who's one of the Polymer engineers.
I had my backpack on, ready to go. I'm Daniel. I work on the Polymer team. How we've been testing our elements so far is we've been using Mocha and Chai and just doing regular tester and development style tests. We find that, for the most part, what we write is a UI for our elements. And that's like you can write tests for like get commuted style and see that your elements got the styling correctly, but we really don't have like a good story for like, oh, I changed this one little thing here. How different is it on the screen? We really maybe need some sort of like, it would be great if we had some sort of primitive on the platform that like compared screenshots perhaps of elements as we built them. But I mean, so far it's just your standard tests. Oh yeah, we to be able to actually test some elements in a real browser environment, a member of our team wrote a plugin to Mocha that spins up iframes, so we can run our tests, launch browsers with Karma, and put our elements in pages, make sure that they are individually they run without like colliding with each other by putting them in iframes. And it's a little slow because iframes aren't super quick to spin up, but we can run our full test suite in about 5 minutes, and it's not the end of the world. And it would be really great if we had more primitives in the platform for all the Blink engineers watching.
So one thing we've done now, some other person wrote this, like a backend guy, so I can't really speak to the detail, but I know we have tests in Xtag that do Slimer and WebDriver over Sauce Labs and do actually take a screenshot. I don't know how extensible that is. So if you check the repository, maybe it works really easily, maybe it doesn't, I can't speak to that, but it is one way that we try to do sort of GUI testing.
All right, so we've got 3 final audience questions, if they can be short and sweet.
How do you handle testing of of accessibility for web components?
Oh. Don't go anywhere.
So I actually,
Sam's our accessibility guy.
yeah, and I don't. So I do most of the accessibility testing as it is right now. I also work with some members of the Chrome team who are in the accessibility working groups, like the ARIA spec and the platform something. The one that talks to screen readers and those people who implement screen readers. So the good news is that even with Shadow DOM scoping mechanism, screen readers generally support that. The ARIA spec allows for actually just even if you were to open Chrome and turn on the flag that says show user agent Shadow DOMs, which shows you how native elements are built. If you open up like an input for date time, you can see that all of the native widgets in Chrome actually use the accessibility features of ARIA. So you can see that they are like roll for a calendar, and they say what their controls are. So that's already working today. And then when we test, a very nice member of the Chrome team just finished wrapping up the accessibility developer toolkit extension for Chrome, so you can run audits on your elements that run against the full ARIA test suite. So we've just started using that, and the widgets, the elements we work on, I go through a manual pass right now of just making sure they've got the proper roles and they look good in a screen reader. But yeah, as soon as everybody can start implementing that.
Okay, final 2 quick questions and quick answers. Steve.
Question will be quick. I don't know about the answer. This is more of a philosophic question. I know it's early days for sort of Polymer and especially web components. Where do you guys, or collectively or individually, see sort of for web components going in terms of standardization, and specifically for editorializing in terms of central repository, or kind of let community decide what's going to be the ultimate way to find things and detect things? Is it more the Ruby model that's like Wild Wild West, or kind of the Python sort of everything comes from CPAN kind of?
So I'll take, I think there's 2 parts to that. On the standardization side, for the specs for the web components platform APIs like custom elements and Shadow DOM, those have been going on in W3C for a number of years. I think they're going very well. On the other front, for the community of how people will talk about web components, I was really encouraged by the works I know and others have been doing at webcomponents.org in particular. I think that's a really good first step. It's a good place for people to share, for component authors and framework authors to share their best practices, to try to come to terms on like exactly how they work so that they can be used interoperably. And I imagine that something like that could grow over time to be a place that that developers could go to find web components as well. I think Jan as well has shown with his with what he showed off that there will be a number of different places to find these things. I think it'll be really healthy for the ecosystem.
So I've actually been talking with Addy. Addy, I don't know if you know the guy, works at Google, does lots of web component stuff. We talked with folks from Opera in a meeting a little while ago about every couple of weeks we have a meeting, and this came up, and we're actually trying to develop a way that you can do sort of like crowdsource code reviews of elements and get them in one central repository on the .org site, and allows you to do like JS manners sort of checks as a community. So that could be good.
So I think it's really encouraging how far we've already come, even though it's a very fledgling ecosystem. So I think that's a good sign for the future.
All right. The final question of the evening is by one of the authors of this fine book, Sean Bennett.
So my question has to do with
only $39.99.
my question is about attributes as components. For example, it'd be nice to have, like, if you're doing internationalization, have a translate attribute you can put on any web component, and it's not just a single component. Is that something that's possible with web components or with any of the platforms like Xtags or Polymer?
So you mean custom attributes? Yes. In general?
So for example, he means a mix-in. So if you have
As an example, there's a plugin for Angular called Angular getText, and you can just stick a translate attribute onto an element, and it will translate it and do a bunch of getText magic under the hood.
I think this exact question actually came up on Polymer Dev today or yesterday. The answer that somebody has given so far, I don't know if it's a canonical one or not, was that you could choose to implement the behavior on a base class and then inherit from that for other things. But the design of web components, as I understand it, and I don't know all the particulars as well enough, would make it, you couldn't just have like a special attribute that you sort of mix into lots of different elements.
So we actually, in Xtag, we have the mixins and the pseudos features would allow for this sort of thing. So you could say translate this attribute, and then that reflects in data, or a mixin that's for translate. It would still require, you'd have to do some coding. There's no thinking around it right now. It's possible.
Okay, I think we're going to have to close it. Thanks for the great question.